And welcome to Hello everyone and welcome to the In the Face of Power panel discussion on racism, police violence, and our legal action against the Ottawa Police Services Board. My name is Jeff Bradley and I'm a PhD student in legal studies at Carleton University, and I'm a member of the Criminalization and Punishment Education Project. I want to first acknowledge that today we are gathered on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Beyond paying respects, we should all commit to working in solidarity with Indigenous peoples for justice, sovereignty, environmental protection, land back, stopping the genocide, no more stolen seekers, and decolonizing so-called Canada and our spaces, including in the academic spaces. This event kicks off Rad Frosh Week, hosted by Opirg-Carleton, an alternative and radical week for students and community members to learn about anti-oppression efforts and tools to bring social, economic, and environmental justice. Starting off the week with a panel discussion on the issues of systemic oppression, racism, and the violence of policing is very important, as these issues directly affect the lives of oppressed groups in our community who are being criminalized and living in poverty, experiencing racism, xenophobia, ableism, homophobia, and transphobia, and many other inequalities. Especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer and trans communities, people with disabilities, migrants, poor communities, and many others trying to survive under capitalism, heteropatriarchy, and white supremacy. The violence and structural inequalities these communities face should outrage us and be a call to action to end systemic oppression and build social transformation for radical freedom, mutual accountability, and compassionate reciprocity. Policing as an institution is inherently racist, classist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, evident through the hyper-policing of certain communities and areas, the abusive surveillance tactics that are used, and the violence responses to vulnerable community members, which leads to death and destruction. We have the power to radically change the future together, and one way we are fighting back is through a small claims suit against the Ottawa Police Services Board for violating our freedom of expression, which is protected under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We are doing this to ensure people in positions of power are held accountable for providing oversight and adequate governance to policing agencies. Also, for hearing our pleas for justice and engaging in participatory democracy. I want to thank the countless delegates who have gone time and time again to speak out against police violence at the Ottawa Police Services Board monthly meetings, calling for defunding of the police and alternatives to policing and criminalization. Your activism and efforts have not gone unnoticed, and I hope the energy will continue, not just through this lawsuit, but through other initiatives within our communities. I want to especially thank Helyeh, who will be our co-moderator for the event, and all of our partnering groups, Opirg-Carleton, the Coalition Against More Surveillance, the Criminalization and Punishment Education Project, Opirg-Repo Ottawa, 613-819 Black Hub, and Black Student Leaders Association here at the University of Ottawa, and many of the individual activists who have made this event possible today. So I will now turn it over to Helyeh.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And a warm welcome to everyone. My name is Helyeh Doutaghi, and I'm a doctoral candidate in law and legal studies at Carleton, and I'm also the programming coordinator of Opirg-Carleton. Before introducing our esteemed panelists today, I'd like to take a minute to reflect on the significance of gathering on the anniversary of the September 11 attacks and the subsequent devastation brought by the war on terror. It is very important that we recognize that the Canadian foreign policy is an extension of its domestic practices of police brutality and racial discrimination. The violence inflicted on our communities here echoes the violence that the Canadian state inflict upon the people of the global South through its foreign policy. Canada's interventions, occupations, and sanctions regime, be it against Haiti, against Yemen, Syria, Libya, or Afghanistan, its support of the illegal colonial occupation of Palestinian territories and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people, its imperialist expansion through NATO in resource-rich countries under the pretense of the war on terror, all stem from a historical legacy of colonization and the enslavement of Indigenous and Black communities here. All of those policies reinforce hateful rhetorics within Canada. The justification of Canada's imperial action requires Black, Indigenous, Muslim, and other racialized communities to be continuously perceived as existential threat to Canada. From criminalization of Indigenous land defense to the xenophobic legislation that disproportionately target Muslim women, to the relentless racism targeting Black community that are used to justify police murders, are all unmask the performative nature of Canadian concepts like reconciliation and multiculturalism, rendering them completely meaningless to the face of Canadian imperialism. Today, we invite you to join us in our struggle for justice as we introduce our legal action against the Ottawa Police Service Board. While we recognize the limitation of the legal system in truly serving our community, and the role and the key role that law plays in perpetuating systems of power and violence against us, we see legal action as one tool in our toolbox for change. And for that, we are really grateful to be in community with and to receive support from movement lawyers such as Yavar Hameed, who continue to advocate for our rights within the judicial system. We are really sorry that we couldn't be with Dr. Atiya Hussain, our first speaker today, due to unforeseen circumstances, and we really look forward to having them in our future panel. So I'll go ahead and introduce our first panelist today, Yavar Hameed, who's also our legal representative in the action. Yavar practices in the area of administrative law and general civil litigation in Ontario with a focus on the defense of human rights against state and corporation action. Since 2001, Yavar has been actively involved in advising clients in the context of unsolicited CSIS interviews and national security matters. He regularly provides advice to individuals and community-based organizations responding to racial profiling concerns, anti-poverty struggles, police brutality, and suppression of political dissent. He also teaches a course in Carleton University's Department of Law and Legal Studies titled State Security and Dissent, which explores the limits imposed upon civil resistance by the state's construction of security in times of peace and war. Thank you, Yavar, so much for being with us.
Thank you, Helyeh. I want to address my comments this morning in three parts. I want to speak about the background on this community-based action against the Ottawa Police Service Board. I want to talk about, secondly, the law as a tool to challenge police abuse. And thirdly, I want to engage with some of the legal and strategic questions that are raised by this community action. So first, in terms of what this legal action is, importantly, this is a community-based action. That is to say that we have 6 organizational plaintiffs. That is to say, we have Opirg-Carleton, Opirg-Ottawa, CPEP, the Black Hub Coalition Against More Surveillance, the Black Student Leaders Association. It's so important that for an action grounded in community, that it's spearheaded by community organizations, as well as for individuals. And I'll get to the significance of that later on in terms of the effects on freedom of expression, having both implications for organizations and the representative members who are under the umbrella of those organizations, as well as individuals who have repeatedly made delegations before the board. The claim itself has been filed in the small claims court. It's an interesting venue, and in the Q&As or the questions we might address. Generally speaking, small claims court is, for lack of a better term, it's the people's court. It's an accessible court. The only jurisdiction that the small claims court has is money damages, and so that's what we're asking for. We're asking for damages for a violation of freedom of expression, Why do we bring it in the small claims court? Well, first of all, as I mentioned, it's an accessible court. It is one where everyday people can make their pitch to the court. Is one that's not cost prohibitive for plaintiffs. And we hope to be able to get to the merits of the issue. Ultimately, because that court doesn't have jurisdiction to strike down laws or strike down policy, really what we want is we want to address this legal question as to whether the right of civil society, of these organizations, of these plaintiffs has been violated by the very organization that has a facilitating role. That is to say, its purpose is to facilitate public expression, public dialogue on policing matters. The claim, as you'll see, you would have seen from the press release, highlights a number of issues, including the fact that after the pandemic, when in-person meetings were becoming more and more current, the facility of hybrid meetings was not permitted. So people who are immunocompromised, people who couldn't make it out physically to these delegations were not permitted to attend virtually. So again, an onus on the physical presence. Why? In our submission, that is a limiting rule, a rule that for some people precludes expression. On February 27, 2023, there was a bylaw that was created that limited delegations to 1 hour for all delegations combined. It limited individual delegations for 3 minutes if more than 12 people were registered to speak during the hour. A written, and this is really important, a written copy of the verbatim comments to be presented had to be submitted to the board in advance. And Robin will be speaking about this in terms of his personal experience, but what that does for public expression, for public dialogue, for public engagement, the fact that to that body, that is the facilitated body, that comments have to be effectively approved and vetted. And I say this, and I don't think I'm being hyperbolic here, is that on occasions, and Robin will speak to this, having submitted his comments in advance, he was later precluded from delivering those comments verbally. And so there is a legitimate concern, a chilling effect that when comments, which may be direct, which may be critical, and I'll get to that when we talk about the importance of challenging the police monopoly on the use of force, legitimate force in society, speaking directly about these things in the only democratic forum which exists in this city to have an engagement on these policy issues. Controlling that, limiting that, precluding that, and pronouncing on the content, what can be said, what can't be said, and precluding people from speaking is a fundamental issue, because this is not simply a matter of attenuating the time limits of individuals who are going to speak, but underlying this is a concern about the messaging. If that messaging is too critical, if it speaks truth to power in ways that, albeit may not be as polite as some people may want, these are fundamental social and human concerns that are echoed by organizational representative groups that represent the grassroots in this community. And if that voice can't be heard, then our submission in the claim is that this is a violation of fundamental protected rights under Section 2 of the Charter on Rights and Freedoms, because it is effectively censoring content, it's censoring the important messages that people want to deliver. And this is a proactive and preemptive process, which I'll talk about in my next sort of section here, about the different ways in which the law can engage with police violence. When we're talking about the Police Service Board, the discussion, the policy discussion with respect to what policing priorities should be, what budget should be. These are perhaps the most important discussions that can be had, because they precede They precede the actual violation of rights, which I, as an individual civil rights and human rights lawyer, deal with often years after the fact. And so when these organizations come forward to bring these systemic issues, these fundamental social issues to the attention of the board, they're speaking both from the perspective of victims of violence affected communities, but doing that with a view to preventing abuses in the future, and that is so significant. So I next want to talk about, generally speaking, the law as a tool to challenge police abuse. And many of you in this room and others online would know of cases in this city. The case of and I refer to them as cases, but these are human lives of Abdirahman Abdi, who was killed after the violent arrest and detention and beating by the fisticuffs of Officer Monsian in 2016. You would have heard of the case of Anthony Oust, who fell to his death from the 12th story of his apartment building after a no-knock raid by the Ottawa Police Service. You may be familiar with the case of Jean-Claude Fenelon, who basically made viral videos about this phenomenon of driving while Black, which prompted the then Chief of Police, Peter Slowly, to acknowledge that there is a problem, or at the time in 2020, a problem with systemic discrimination within the Ottawa Police Service, a very significant message coming from the Chief of Police at the time. Now, these cases that you would have read about, you would have followed them in the news, you would have seen them on the internet, these are all about violations that occurred in the past. And the potential for the law to shed light on these is always about retrospective benefit, retrospective damages, remedies that may happen in the future. We represent, my law firm represents the family of Anthony Oust, but the civil claim that was launched in that case is not a benefit to Anthony. It is for his family. It is to help the community grieve and respond. So fundamentally, what this lawsuit is about that a priori discussion, that fundamental discussion that happens before these abuses. And so when I first started becoming involved in legal cases involving the police use of force, I thought that legal actions, the invocation of civil rights, human rights were things that really antagonized the police. That there was a fundamental antagonism to what they do. But over the years, I came to realize that these things, as Peter Rosenthal, a lawyer who I greatly respect, he talked about these things as legal perturbations. You file a claim, you bring a Charter of Rights motion, a state of abuse motion. These are things that are routine. The role of the police within the matrix of the criminal justice system and the civil justice system is so deeply ingrained that the legal checks and balances come to be expected by the system. And so these lawsuits that like the one that we're filing today in some respect, but there are distinguishing features, and I'll get to that. They're not new. They're not something that's anomalous. These are built into the legal system. But I think at a very important social and strategic level, we need to think about when engaging with the law. And I say this as a lawyer who does this for my job day in and day out. The law is also a legitimizing feature of these various systems. And so when we fight these battles, when we go before the courts to get a remedy on civil rights, when we look for damages, when we get some kind of retrospective compensation, we are supposed to give some measure of accountability to those people who are affected. And I think we need to think as strategic thinkers, as activists, academics, scholars, and the general public about what that means ultimately for individual cases, and I have a strong affinity to individual rights and trying to get a remedy for individuals. That's really important to me. But I think this broader question of what it means for communities when we involve ourselves in these individual struggles, are we able to get some measure of structural or systemic justice? I want to talk about a few comments on the normalization of police power. And in particular, some of you may have read in the CBC that on May 9th, 2023, at the corner of Charlotte and Daly, an elementary school student flipped the bird to policemen who were outside of his school bus. This was not a polite act, not a deferential act. It was not a respectful act, but it was, as the Quebec courts have said, it's actually a constitutionally protected right of free expression. Professor Anne Levesque, who's a professor here at University of Ottawa, happens to be a law professor, a human rights lawyer, and witnessed this along with her daughters who were standing at that corner. And she filed a complaint over the fact that the officers boarded the bus, reprimanded the student, threatened to take him away in a police cruiser, did not do that, as I understand from the media reports, but then went to his school and made a formal complaint to the principal about this act of disrespect. And I think that what's significant about that story, and in some respect, we talk about the egregious forms of police violence, and I mentioned some of those cases. This is not one of those cases, but I think it's so significant in the sense of how normalized the role and presence of police is in society, such that it is expected that there must be deference, there must be respect for officers at all times. And if that respect is not meted out in the way that police officers deem to be fit, they may take action and use their force to command respect. And I think that this really needs to trigger some thought about how to push back against this normalization of police force and police presence in society. On the question of the law and whether it's an effective method of challenging structural oppression, in so many ways, the tools of the law, they're procedural, they're archaic, they're exclusionary. People can't afford to go to court. Civil actions are few and far between against the police. The majority of charter-based cases involving the police use of force tend to be in the criminal justice system where they're used as defenses, not really seeking some kind of remedy for human rights violations otherwise. And I think that that's intentionally so, because the human rights system is overburdened, the civil courts are overburdened. We're in a state of lack of judicial resources to provide basic access to justice for affected communities. And so it's unsurprising that there is this, this real sort of jaded perspective about what legal process can bring. And I wanted us to ponder for a moment on some of the thoughts of activists and academics such as Hersh, who talk about the building of networks of solidarities, centering Indigenous sovereignty, and being in tune with legal action. Not to say that legal action is the be-all and the end-all for how to achieve systemic and structural justice, but in tandem with legal action, there can be a place and there can be a moment to be able to speak truth to power, to do that with the focus of the media, to do that with a broader public discussion that raises these issues, like what is happening in this case against the Ottawa Police Service Board. A question may be asked, and I think that Robin is probably better to address this, as to what the function is and what the utility is of the Police Service Board. We're fighting in this claim for remedial damages for lack of participation in a board that is supposed to have some impact on policy and priorities. I think a question has to be asked in practice. Are these public messages being heard? Is there a difference? And how do we translate that community momentum into a shift of priorities? I think that's a strategic question, but the legal action brings that into relief. It brings that before all of you. It allows us to think about it in a forum that judicially and socially we can construct these questions perhaps in somewhat reductivist ways, but in ways that we can understand these fundamental questions of democracy as being important to the legal and judicial system. I want to end off with an engagement with some of the basic questions that this legal claim raises. First of all, as I've indicated with the case on in May of this year of flipping the bird, this I don't mean to trivialize this action is not about flipping the bird literally, but it is not an action that sort of dials down the fact that there are direct truths that have been said that need to be said at public meetings, and when there is censorship, when there is an elimination and reduction of that messaging, is that consistent with democratic values in Canada? It's a fundamental concern, and I think that this claim brings it up. I mentioned before how this claim is a product and a consequence of community struggle. You see that from the community organizations that are represented. I think that's vital to building the momentum and the community behind this action. It's an accessible forum, somewhat unique, and people might have queries like as to what's going to happen at the end of this process, but we're only in the beginning stages. But the aim of this action really relates to engaging with the deliberative process around things that I've indicated at the outset are so pivotal to what priorities and the raison d'etre of the police is to begin with. And so, I think that there's a time and there's a place for individual rights litigation. This is the first case that I've dealt with that raises these fundamental philosophic, practical, and strategic issues and have them debated in the context of a charter action. I think it's appropriate to do so, and I look forward to seeing what the response and the defense of the Police Service Board that we expect sometime this week to respond to this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yavar. I really appreciate it. All right, our next speaker is Robin Brown, who has started his Black activism organizing to end South African apartheid. He remains motivated by a desire to help ensure a more equitable world for his sons and grandkids.
Hello, everybody. I want to start off actually by thanking my co-plaintiffs for joining us in this lawsuit, and especially again, I want to thank Yavar, because what Yavar mentioned about for sure one of the key barriers to taking any legal action is the cost of it. Right, so we have the Ottawa Police charging a young Black man, and suddenly they got to like find a lawyer or get a legal. So the fact that Yavar is doing this pro bono is part of the reason that we're actually able to do this. So I want to say thank you very much to Yavar for doing that. So again, I lead the 61381M Black Hub. We work exclusively on addressing systemic anti-Black racism. So I'm not going to get to why that, well, how that relates to this, but so part of how it does is that, so Yavar did a good job of laying out the kind of specific issues around this claim, but there's a much larger issue, and that is that the Ottawa Police Board and the police they're all part of what I call collective resistance. Okay. So, and this is a term I started using after last year. I attended a conference put on by the United Way, which is focused on like implementing equity, diversity, and inclusion in large organizations. Anyway, there was a representative from the Tamarack Institute who came to that conference, and she put up a definition on the screen of a framework they use called collective impact that they use to work. And when she put it up, I was like, that I saw an alternative definition. This one just popped into my head that perfectly describes the collective resistance I'm talking about. So I'm going to read her definition, then I'm going to read the alternative. So what she said was, collective impact is a network of community, members, organizations, and institutions that advance equity by learning together, aligning, and integrating their actions to achieve systems-level change. And when that was on the screen, immediately I was seeing a definition of, again, what I call collective resistance, which the board is part of, which was this. Collective resistance is a network of community, members, organizations, and institutions that impede movement toward real equity by working together, aligning, and integrating their actions, resulting in resistance to systems-level change. Okay? So the board is part of this, right? And the police are also part of this collective resistance, right? And I'll give you one example of the how the police are involved right now, which is very relevant. So Yavar made reference to the case of Abdi, Reverend Abdi. So part of the settlement of that case was that the police were supposed to come up with an alternative way of dealing with people in mental health crisis. So the police first came forward in January 2021 and said, hey, we have this new system, we're gonna come up with a new system. And then the community was like, no, you idiots. We don't want you involved or leading anything. So they had created something called the Guiding Council. So they moved under the city. Okay? But so the resulting Guiding Council is now, again, created by the police. The police are on it, and it's led to exactly what we expected, which is a system that still allows for, they're proposing a system, an alternative mental health response system that still allows for dangerous levels of police involvement, doesn't touch a cent of the police budget, it takes years to implement. This is what I talk about in terms of collective resistance. So the board, the Ottawa Police Services Board, also engages in this collective resistance. And part of how they're doing it, again, Yavar made reference to this. This is what the suit is all about. The way that they're bringing in these restrictions on public delegations. Right? So I'll just talk about. Actually, maybe it is important to give a little bit of the background. So, in November of 2020, there was a board meeting, an Ottawa Police Services Board meeting, where like 100 people came to delegate against the police budget. People also raised the issue that the board had always operated in a way where delegates can't ask questions of the board. Okay, so that was an issue. So the board at that point, Diane Deems, the chair, they actually responded, and Councilor Ralston King was on the board. They actually responded in a way where they were trying to address what was going on. It wasn't perfect, but they were trying to address it. Then the Freedom Convoy happened in February of 2022. That board got tossed out, and a new one came in, and Yavar made reference to some of the restrictions that new board started to bring in, including, yes, requiring delegates to submit our remarks in writing in full. Okay, so I'll give you my own personal experience. So I've been delegating at the board every month for like a year and a half. Okay, so some of the restrictions seem to be clearly targeted, like at me personally, like the one where they said, hey, you know what? We're going to prioritize people who haven't spoken to the board in the last 3 months. Right. So actually, the few of us are speaking regularly, so that seemed to be targeting us directly. But it got even more personal. So at the May meeting, I was in New York at the United Nations, so I couldn't speak. So a friend of mine, his daughter was going to speak on my behalf. Like she'd done that in September. So then the new board chair, Dr. Gail Beck, said, no, that can't happen. We've changed the rules there too, so that's no longer allowed. You can't have somebody speak on your behalf. So my remarks were not delivered in May. Then in June, I came, and actually I'm going to read this. In June, I submitted my remarks in writing in full. The board meetings are on Monday. Okay, the way it works is on Friday you get an email from the board director, his name is Randa, saying, hey, here you go, you've been approved, here's the Zoom link. Okay, so I got that Zoom link on the Friday. When I was ready to speak on the Monday, this is for the June meeting, but Gail Beck came up and said, you know what? I have a conflict of interest with this delegation in the way that it characterizes me, the chair, and I want to have a vote to not allow this person to speak. And all in favor? And they all voted unanimously to block me from speaking. Okay, that was in June. And in July, I'm like, all right, I can't critique them. So then I submit my remarks talking about the guiding council that I just spoke about, right, which was created by the police, and the police are on it. And then they again banned me from speaking, saying, sorry, this doesn't relate to the mandate of the board. Okay. So I'm gonna actually, I hadn't planned to do this, but I'm gonna read you a bit of the delegation, the June delegation that they voted to not allow, okay? Quote. Keep in mind that she said it's inappropriate in the way it characterizes the board chair. Quote, Madam Chair, your appointment is the latest action to erode our faith in this board and city council. We say this partly based on what you said on CBC's Ottawa Morning on April 27th. You said the police you've dealt with who have brought people in mental health crisis to the hospital are all very compassionate. Well, that's really different from what people said in the public consultation report of the Guiding Council on Mental Health and Addictions. Here's an excerpt from the Guiding Council's report on their consultation with members of Ottawa's Black community. Quote, negative experiences with police were recurring sentiments among the Black community. Participants gave vivid descriptions about their encounters with police. Personal statements included being treated like a criminal and, quote, forced into handcuffs. I came home with bruises, very traumatic, another said. The way I was treated as a criminal, they came to whisk me away and take me behind bars. That's how it felt. Participants expressed their frustrations with police response that created a scene devoid of decency and privacy. One person stated, quote, police came, it was like a crime scene. I was against the wall. I was so scared, unquote. This is continuing now with my remark. And Madam Chair, what was also remarkable about your CBC interview was what you didn't say. You didn't say the main reason people call the police to deal with people in mental health crisis is because they have no other choice. But your biggest omission was not mentioning all the people in mental health crisis who have ended up dead after Ottawa police were called, like people like Abdi Rahman Abdi, Anthony House, and Greg Ritchie. All you said was, quote, there have been some interactions that have not gone so well. Yeah, not well at all, unquote. That's what they banned. Okay, and the rest of my delegation didn't even talk about her. So part of the reason you see that I'm reading a feature called the Black Legal Militia, I'll tell you why that is. Because a lot of folks, again, as I mentioned, we work exclusively on issues of systemic anti-Black racism, and a lot of solutions that people suggest to things like that have some element of awareness raising. And the idea behind that being that if you just educate people about stuff, they'll stop doing all that discrimination stuff. We're like, yeah, that's not what we see, because we see that people with power, right, who have it due to systemic discrimination, don't give up 1 ounce of it without being forced. In fact, what they do is they try to get more of it, right? So, and a key way to force them to change, to make change, is through legal action, right? So hence the Black Legal Militia, the idea, and this action is right. This is a Black Legal Militia thing, right? So I'll just end by just kind of highlighting, and Yavar has hit on some of this, but some of when we talk about the collective resistance, it's all about maintaining the status quo. I just want to talk about some of the status quo that is being maintained, right? So police violence, the police charging young Black men with gun offenses, for example. I mentor a young Black guy from Rwanda for the last 2 years. Both his brothers have been charged with gun offenses. It's like, and the police have the guns and gangs unit that seems to do nothing about reducing the number of guns, and certainly nothing about gangs, because there are none, according to the Crime Prevention Ottawa's own report. Right. So it's like, let me tell you, once the police charge the young men with a gun offense, their lives the impact is incredible. So this young Black man I mentor, for example, his family applied for refugee status. Once his brother got charged, their application for the entire family got paused, right? So this is the kind of impact we're talking about here. And another, right, and another way, and part of the way we see this in terms of, and I'll end with, the way the police communicate to maintain this whole system is, so you, for example, there was the shooting that happened at the wedding in Ottawa recently. Right. And you heard, and again, every time there's a shooting like this, the police come out with a statement that says, there's no threat to public safety at this time. Here's the question, who do they see as members of the public? Right? There's certainly a threat to everybody who lives in that community, anybody who's going to go to a wedding at that place next week, right? So this is all we're talking about. And then I'll end up by, again, just picking up on what Yavar said about this idea that absolutely, that the police are so normalized that there's this expectation of like respect for the police. This is part of the reason why like Black folks who get stopped by the police and question why they're stopped get beat up or whatever, because the police themselves have this idea that there must be absolute respect for them, right? It's kind of like, things were on the plantation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin, and for all your work that you've done for this case. Our next speaker is Sam Hersh, who is a community and political organizer based in Ottawa, who has worked on multiple issues based an electoral campaign, as well as in the labor movement, fighting for social, economic, and environmental justice.
First, I want to apologize for being late. For those who were here earlier. Je suis demandé de faire des interventions en français, donc je vais juste faire comme un partie de ma portion en français, comme une introductoire. Donc, bonjour, comme je dis, je vais donner une brève introduction en français pour tous celles qui sont ici aujourd'hui en ligne ou en personne qui écoutent en français. Et je voulais premièrement encore reconnaître que nous sommes sur les terres traditionnelles non cédées du peuple algonquin, qui sont ici depuis des temps immémoriaux. Et c'est important pour moi de ne pas juste dire ces mots dans une manière passive, mais de respecter vraiment et reconnaître qu'on vit dans une ville et un territoire où les personnes autochtones ne sont pas respectées, où leur taux d'emprisonnement est 10 fois plus haut que la moyenne, qui est important de mentionner à cause du sujet de ce panel aujourd'hui. Donc, comme a déjà été parlé, nous avons lancé notre poursuite le 9 août, mais la conversation autour de cela a commencé un couple de mois avant, environ avril, mais les actions odieuses de la Commission de services policiers ont commencé beaucoup plus tôt que ça, que vous pouvez imaginer et que plusieurs gens ont parlé d'aujourd'hui. Et il y a plusieurs groupes, organisations et personnes qui sont impliquées dans ce procès, mais sont déjà mentionnés, donc je ne vais pas aller trop dans le détail de là. Mais ce sont toutes des organisations et des individus qui ont fait beaucoup de travail important dans ce domaine. Je ne vais pas aller trop dans les détails qui nous mènent, nous, ici aujourd'hui, car je saurai quelques détails pour mes commentaires plus tard, mais le focus du poursuite est, comme Yavar a déjà mentionné, la violation des droits de la Charte, plus spécifiquement le droit de la liberté d'expression. Yavar et Robin a déjà donné des exemples de réglementation qui est en question aujourd'hui, plus particulièrement la limite sur le temps pour les délégués à 1 heure. Puis en plus, je pense qu'il est encore pire et la réglementation que vous devrez envoyer tous vos commentaires oraux avant réunion, que je pense est vraiment problématique pour plusieurs raisons. De manière pas seulement pour moi, mais aussi dans une manière de l'accessibilité pour les gens qui sont pas capables de faire cela. Donc ça, c'est ultimement ce procès-là, ce poursuite, cette initiative, c'est un dernier recours. It's a last resort pour que nous puissions reprendre cette venue pour pousser la commission et notre ville. On n'est pas ici devant vous tout en parlant de ça parce que c'est quelque chose qu'on voulait. You know, this is not something that we wanted to come to, right? We want to go to these democratic institutions to be able to speak out. Juste en l'introduction, je voulais juste dire aussi, je pense que c'est aussi il y a une importante conversation d'avoir comme l'utilité d'aller parler à la commission de services policiers parce que je pense qu'il y a beaucoup beaucoup de personnes qui ont des différentes idées de comment engager avec ce sujet. Et c'est important, certainement, de noter l'important aussi d'engager avec ça hors de les institutions démocratiques et les institutions gouvernementaux. So as I said, I mean, I think there's an important thing to talk about in terms of getting involved and pushing for this issue, you know, outside of the Police Services Board, of course, and outside of democratic and government institutions, because we know change doesn't always come from there. And that's sort of, you know, why we've launched this suit. You know, so, and also so we can get that back. And of course, like, you know, again, many have said that, you know, why are you doing this? Why do you keep going to the board? But I think I just want to mention briefly, you know, I think, and I recognize those criticisms, and I think they're legitimate. I do think, having gone, as someone who has spoken, and Robin has spoken, and others, and Jeff as well, excuse me, we have actually enacted some, or pushed for some things that have changed, or, you know, brought the conversation forward. And I think it's important that we're putting this, like, I just want to bring up some of those examples. So, I mean, dynamic entries are a big one, and dynamic entries are, you know, when the police come in a military style assault, as what happened to Anthony House, that led to his death. You know, many people released a press release before as well, but spoke at the board about it at length with many delegates, and you know, essentially, you know, shamed the members of the board and the former Chief Slowly to eventually, you know, they said they were putting it to an end, or at least they limited the practice. We don't really know for sure, but I think we really changed the conversation there and forced them to react to that. Another thing is, you know, tasers as well. They are eventually, at this point now, going to, at least in their budget this year, going to approve $1 million on tasers. But the former board, we did, you know, the community make them stop and pause and reevaluate that. And of course, after, you know, as Robin already mentioned, and there's some context there, the former police board was turfed. You know, and the new board was brought in, that sort of has gone away with. And there's a bunch of other stuff too. I mean, there was a police budget survey in 2021 or 2022 that was very unscientific and you know, said that, you know, more people wanted more money for police, but we challenged that as well at the board in the meetings and public delegations and in other ways, and you know, forced them to backtrack on that as well. So I think, you know, just all to say that, you know, there is, I think, utility still to a certain extent to speaking out of the board, and this is why we're bringing forward this suit. And again, as Robin said, you know, I want to thank Yavar for helping us do this, because you know, otherwise we wouldn't be able to. And the reason that we're bringing it to small claims court, and we had done some media interviews, you know, saying, like, why are you bringing it to small claims court? Why are you bringing it to Superior Court, since it's a charter violation? And you know, like Yavar, like Robin mentioned, we are all you know, as you know, individuals who are not super wealthy, and organizations that are very grassroots organizations. So this is sort of a way that we can challenge them, because as I said, you know, we've gone to the board, we've tried to talk to them, we've tried to say, like, why are you doing this? There are other ways to do it, and they haven't listened. So this is sort of like a last resort. And I don't, you know, I don't want to keep my comments too long, but one thing that I wanted to bring this all back to is that you know, the sort of the political context here, and sort of frame this as in a greater theme of a response, a right-wing backlash to you know, sort of social justice, and folks who have sort of risen up after the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police. I think this sort of clamping down on dissent and silencing people at the Police Services Board is sort of fits into that vacuum, that vein of the right-wing backlash against people actually standing up to police. And we're seeing this across the country, right? When it comes to things like safe injection sites, we're seeing the Conservative Party and other conservative forces, you know, trying to, for lack of a better word, get rid of those. And I mean, especially as more prevalently, we've seen this on things like bail reform, where the Canadian Police Association is, is saying we need to have bail reform, essentially make it harder for people to get bail and stricter prison sentences. And I think we're getting back into those sort of tough on crime conservatives. And a large reason for that, again, is because folks like us, not just us here, but some folks in the room as well who spoke at the Police Services Board, but obviously it's greater than that, people who have risen up in the streets as well, because we can't have a discourse at the board without action in the streets as well. And I think that's a big reason for it. And I think we're seeing that big right-wing shift. Not to say, I think the Ottawa Police Service has always been right-wing, of course, and that's just the nature of the institution. But, I think with the convoy we saw, a lot of that sort of exposed the right-wing nature of those officers and the sort of systemic way. And I suppose I'll just bring up a personal example as someone who is more publicly involved. And there's a lot of people who I won't mention, but who do a lot of the work who don't like to be public because of obviously the nature of this in the surveillance state. And I think they need to be acknowledged. And obviously as like a white man, I have a lot more privilege to be able to do this work without with less risk attached to it in many ways. But I was working on the municipal election and was very tired, and the day after saw my name mentioned in the public emergency inquiry by a journalist and on TV and stuff, and I was just like, wow, what's going on? This is a bit overwhelming, but my name was mentioned in a police report that a certain Sergeant Chris Keys had written before the convoy even came to town to sort of do an overlay of what was happening. And he at the first part he quoted Rex Murphy, who, as many of you might know, is a very right-wing commentator for the Globe and Mail, not the Globe and Mail, sorry, the National Post, same thing. But taking that as fact, and then had a portion in it, saying, and quote, the protests globally are made up almost entirely of middle-class members of society, since the so-called silent majority is numerically much larger than the professional activists such as local Sam Hersh can order up. So that was sort of something that was very shocking to see. And a lot of us who do this work know to a certain extent that we're being monitored by police. But that was, to see it confirmed is something else. They also spelled my name wrong, but that's another story. But no, and I don't want to make it about myself, of course, but I think this is an example of state surveillance and like also that sort of right-wing sort of rod, for lack of a better word, that exists in the police, and sort of they're feeling their backs up against the wall. And this is just another example of that sort of, and Robin sort of broached it too, that collective resistance within the police and all these like institutions, corporate institutions that say they need the police to continue to fight for our safety or whatever they say. And there's something else I wanted to bring up, but forgot it. Anyways, maybe it'll come up in the question and answer period. But yeah, so I think we'll see how our action goes. But again, I think it's important that we continue to fight, and that's the reason that we've brought this suit forward. And I want to thank you all for coming out today, and the folks online, and Yavar again, and to the other panelists.
All right, thank you so much, Sam, and everyone, and all of you for being here, and all those participants online. I just want to echo our gratitude for all of us to be here. We're going to open the floor. We can take a few questions, especially because we're missing one of our speakers. We have a little bit more time. So I'm going to open the floor, and we'll take questions online as well. So folks who are joining us through Zoom can type their questions, and Ashton will be reading those for us. But for now, I'm going to start with those in the room. Are there any questions? We're going to take a few, and then we'll have our speakers respond to them. So are there any questions that we can start by? Yeah.
I had a question for Dr. Yavar. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I'm not a doctor, but
okay. I guess. I was just gonna ask, what do you expect the police defense to this collective action to be?
I mean, I didn't really get into it, but anytime a charter violation is alleged, the state under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms has the opportunity to justify whatever incursion on rights as being reasonable in a free and democratic society. So I think the real debate here will be one around reasonableness. Were these measures put on in some way to minimally impair? Was there an overall, and this is hard to sort of grasp here, but if they can connect it to a larger state objective, like somehow we needed to have this advanced vetting, we needed to limit the time, et cetera. One of the reasons why I see that difficult to be rationalized as kind of like a rational connection with an overall state imperative is that this board is meant to facilitate discussion. So when you put those parameters around it and in some way causing this chilling effect, it really seems to be inimical to the very objective of the board. So there is this, these defenses they can put up under Section 1 of the Charter, and ultimately there will be a balancing, in terms of what the state prerogative is to have reasonable measures versus the importance of democratic participation around these issues. I mean, one of the things that hasn't gotten to the state yet, but like because of the real importance of this messaging and the fact that it doesn't really exist anywhere else, I would say that that sort of should overshadow or trump the state's ability to fetter that right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yavar. Are there any questions?
Actually, can I add something to that?
Please, go ahead.
So one of the reasons the board has said that, and I can see this perhaps coming up in the defense, one of the reasons they've given for why they're limiting public delegations is the idea that there's just too many of them and it's getting in the way of the important work of the board. Right? So I want to tell you a story about some of the important work of the board that I saw, and it was at their May 1st meeting. This was of the Policy and Governance Committee of the Ottawa Police Services Board. They were they were addressing some motions that had been brought forward by the previous board, right? The board that got turfed out during the occupation. One of those motions was brought forth by Diane Dean, the former chair, and it was her saying, you know what? We should look at the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we should take a look at which one of those apply to the Ottawa Police Services, Ottawa Police Service and the Ottawa Police Services Board. And so the chair back first said, hey, so what do people think? Mayor, what do you think? Mayor Sutcliffe? He's like, I don't have strong feelings either way. And then they voted to dismiss that motion. And that was after they'd done a land acknowledgement.
Oh, gosh.
I had another question for Mr. Brown, if nobody else has questions here. So you mentioned that raising awareness often isn't effective. Do you believe that public protests are effective?
Yes, public protests are essentially, because they for a number of reasons. But one of the things that public and there are different kinds of public protests too, right? Obviously, right. So I'm talking with the ones that let's say have some element of civil disobedience. Those are effective because those then make the people that the powers that be go, we may not be able to control this. That introduces that element of them not being able to control it, and that fear is essential to them getting them to do anything to make fundamental change. Yeah.
And just to add to that, I think a lot of us who have gone and spoken at the Police Services Board, I mean, I think we know and recognize that we're not going to change their minds, and they've told us as much too. I mean, in November 2020, when there was over 100 people that spoke at the meeting, before everyone spoke, the former chair Diane Dean said, we're not going to change anything. We're going to keep it. So it's like a bad way to preface the meeting when over 100 people are there. And there are more examples of that. But I think a lot of us go to sort of protest kind of way to, again, sort of shame them and expose them. And, we know not many people are watching the Police Services Board meeting all the time, but there are, reporters there sometimes, things like that, and they'll report on some things that people say, and it does bring a lot more discussion and visibility and awareness to the issue.
Thank you all. We have one question online, and I'm gonna ask Ashton to read that for us.
Hi, yes, I'm Ashton from Opirg-Carleton. I don't know how is it sounding okay? Everyone's hearing my
This is
voice?
perfect, Ashton. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. Yep, so we have one in the Q&A here. Feel free to use the chat or Q&A function here. If you want to do a follow-up, please raise your hand and I will call on you to have, I guess, audio. The question is, will this lawsuit work on revealing a link to a role that current police chief Stubbs might be playing in squashing public delegations? Also, what is the most ideal outcome and the most desirable outcome for this lawsuit?
Thank you, Ashton. Do we have volunteers from our panelists?
So linkages to the police chief, I think, will be probably difficult to establish, given that in the small claims court, there is not a discovery process. So really, in a sense, sort of what you see is what you get. Like we've set out in the February 2023 bylaw and a number of restrictions that we have direct access to. There might be some things in the defense that we haven't seen before, but we would be prepared to go before a judge based on the record that we have now to establish whether there is a violation of the charter. So these other issues, although they may be significant, I don't think that we would necessarily have scope to delve into them. In terms of the outcome, it's difficult to know. I think that on principle, I mean, one might say that it's not a lot of money. I didn't indicate that the amount, the quantum is less than $30,000, $27,500 that's being sought for a couple of reasons. One is that the violation of freedom of expression in a context like this doesn't really attach a very high quantum of damages. So it's really the individual and organizational rights that are stacked up and they amount to that quantum. And I think it's a reasonable one, and it's supported by the jurisprudence. Could the city pay that amount? Of course. But whether the city pays it or if it decides to take us on in going to court, either of those scenarios are an acknowledgement that rights have been infringed. And I think that ultimately, either of those scenarios, I don't think that there will be just an acknowledgement that rights were infringed and there'll be a payout. I think that because these restrictive actions were made on notice, they were made through a certain process, the city will attempt to justify it. And the outcome would be to have a judge look at this and say, this is a violation of people's fundamental rights and it's not constitutionally justifiable.
I could just add, and not necessarily on that point, but it's good that someone brought up Chief Stubbs, because I think it's important. Again, I was saying like the sort of reaction or like right-wing backlash. I think the appointment of Chief Stubbs as chief of police is part of that pattern. As many people might know, might not know, he was instrumental in the raid on Wet'suwet'en lands in BC as a commissioner there, as a deputy commissioner, whatever his role was there. And also like the nature of his appointment was very controversial. He was appointed 3 days before the municipal election. Many people said to wait, so there was more conversation around that. Of course, as many of us know, it doesn't really matter who's chief of police at the end of the day. But I do think that, things have gotten notably worse, I will say, under Chief Stubbs and the new Police Services Board. So I just wanted to add that because none of us brought up the chief in our remarks. So I think it's important to give a little bit of context around that.
Actually, I would like to add to that. Yeah. So just on the chief. So he attends all the Ottawa Police Services Board meetings. So he was there at the meeting, for example, where they voted to ban me. Right. So yeah, he's not a member of the board. He didn't vote, whatever. But I mean, it was a violation of a pretty basic democratic right. Right. So why did the chief say, "Hey, what's going on here, folks?" He sat silently. So just saying that. Just a comment on the process of small claims, and I often say that for the hub, two of the most powerful tools that we use are access to information, that Access to Information Act, and small claims, right? So small claims, the way it works is us having filed this suit. Okay, so the board, as soon as you ever filed it, the board had, I think, 20 days, is it? Really? 20 days to respond? It's like
Up to 30.
up to 30, okay. So we're expecting the response by, actually is due today, is right. So now, if they file it, one of the next steps is a mandatory settlement conference. And this is, again, Yavar can back this up. This is a basic legal concept of they try to get the parties together to settle things so it doesn't have to go to trial, right? And cost the public money. So this is a fantastic idea. This means that the chair, they have to come to this mandatory settlement conference. That's going to be their legal representative. It'll be, I assume, Chair Beck, right? Yavar, and all the plaintiffs get in together to say, let's make a deal. Right? And they're highly motivated to do so. Because Yavar was pointing out, if they either like just try to pay us off or go to trial, it's admitting guilt that they violated our constitutional right. They're not going to want to do that. So they're on the defensive right now. So after literally years of us going and talking and kind of feeling powerless to a degree, although Sam laid out some of the things that we did get, but this, we now have them on the defensive. And that is a very good thing.
Thank you very much, all. We have one more question online, but I wanna give a chance to folks in the room. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious because we've sort of talked a bit about the city, about the Police Services Board. So is the claim filed against the Police Services Board specifically, against the city as the governing body? And then also curious how that, that I think part of the concern with the Police Services Board limiting delegations is also all the other city committees and their delegations, and whether or not that's whether police services is setting a precedent for those, and whether this is also seen as a way of setting a precedent that will challenge any further limitations on delegations to finance or planning or all the other city committees.
Well, I just I think that's a really good point. Partially because I think part of, I mean, I didn't read the entire claim, but part of the when I've been speaking to some media, what I've been saying, and for a long time, like since these rules, this sort of bylaw changes came to light in about a couple months ago, is that no other committee or board at the city works in this way. There are no rules that are this strict. It's the only committee or board rather that has rules that are this strict. So I think that's important to note. And in fact, I'm not sure if there are any other police services boards across the entire province that have rules that are this strict. But yeah, I mean, I haven't even really thought about that. that other boards and committees can use this as a way to sort of stifle dissent in other ways. I haven't really seen any indication of that, but I think it's important to note though on that point, like again, like no other body in the city is as restrictive as the Police Services Board is. And the Police Services Board acted the same way as it had for years and years or whatever since amalgamation, I suppose, in 2001, as every other board and committee did. But as soon as people started to come out and speak out in the last 2-3 years, that's when things changed. So it's a bit suspicious to say the least.
Just on the correlation between the city of Ottawa and the board, this is the first time that I've launched an action against the board as the board. Anytime a claim is filed against the police for any police action, the board is the defendant. So you can name police officers, but ultimately it's the vicarious liability of the board. And in those cases, typically, I'm trying to think if there were some exceptions. It's the city solicitor that responds. So through the city, in this case, they've hired a Bay Street law firm, Borden Ladner Gervais. So it's not the city solicitor, but I would imagine, although I don't know, that the city solicitor may also be advising them. So I think there are implications for the city generally in these kinds of defenses.
Yeah, I'd like to add another great question. Okay, because so I have experienced some similar stuff at a city committee, which I think it was the one that was formerly called FEDCO, the Federation of
Finance and Corporate
Yeah. So actually two of us went to speak about, they were talking about the nightlife economy plan. Okay, and part of that was a nightlife economy safety plan. So we went to speak to basically say, all right, if you're doing a safety plan, like don't be like focusing on the police to be part of it. And it was who was the chair that so I think Councilor Catherine Kitts was the chair. She was the first one to interrupt me and say, "You're off topic," and I'm like, off topic. I'm off topic. I'm talking about the police's role. And no, we're here talking about the nightlife plan, not the police. And I'm like, so, and then Riley Brockington, council, also jumped in. They didn't let me finish. They said, "You're off topic. You cannot complete your done." So yes, so we're very concerned. So hopefully what's going on here will send a message to other committees. Don't try and pull that shit.
I do want to just add one more thing to that, because I think it's important. Especially when it comes to the board's defense, I think, because one of the things that one of the journalists asked me was, well, can't they just go and speak at another board or another committee about this issue? And I think, you know, obviously that's problematic, because it's like, well, we should be able to go and speak at this board and they shouldn't be limiting what we have to say, because, you know, although the role of police can be relevant in different committees, like again, that what happened to Robin happened to other people at different committees, right? So I think you know, they might use that as their defense, but it's important to say, well, like all boards and committee meetings should be accessible, and also all to say, like, you know, we would like to, I think an ideal outcome, like someone was saying, to be reversed to sort of what it was before. But even that being said, like what it was before was also not an ideal way to interact with the public. So what's the ideal form? I don't know, but certainly what it is now is a lot worse.
Thank you all so much. We have one more question on and we'll do a last round here and then we'll wrap up. Ashton?
Yeah, so it's very related to the last question. Can you comment on whether or not there may be legal remedies available with respect to the board's compliance or non-compliance with the Ontario Police Services Act in terms of fulfilling its mandate? Got that there?
Read the question, no? Anyone?
I mean, generally speaking, I don't know sort of what the statutory implications are for the mandate of the board, but what I could say generally is that I think it's very much on point in the sense that the function of the board, to the extent that it's set out, you know, it is mandated, is really what we've been seeing, you know, go off the rails. And so I think that the discussion about what is the objective of the board, what is the mandate of the board, is it doing what it's supposed to do, that will be key to determining whether or not there's been a violation of rights. It's not going to be a specific performance remedy in the sense that the court is going to tell the board what to do. But I think, you know, the plaintiffs can sort of hold this up and say, look, there was a violation of rights that cost the board money, that there's actually some injury here, therefore the board's approach needs to change.
All right, thank you very much. Any other final questions?
It's a general question about how can we stay updated on like how the case goes?
Like we'll be posting it on like social media, I think, like all the different groups will keep folks informed. I don't think this is like the last panel either, right? We're gonna host more discussions and stuff, and yeah, I don't think this is the end of it.
No. The next thing we'll be communicating is when we get the defense from the report. I mean, I cannot wait to see.
And maybe if we're allowed to speak about it at the Police Services Board, maybe you'll see it.
Right. Oh, but actually on that note, so I all right, so so the board has a meet every month. So I sent in my request to speak for the September meeting, which is September 25th. And they're asking us to send in our written remarks, right? So the administrator Randa said, "Thank you very much, Robin. Please, you know, send us what you'll be saying." So I sent our press release.
Wonderful. Thank you all so very much. for being here, all of our panelists, especially Yavar and all those who are joining us online. Please, we'll continue to post information as we receive any response from the police on our socials. So please make sure to follow us and follow our upcoming events, both at Opirg-Carleton, but also other partner organizations. And we look forward to seeing you and receiving your support in this struggle. Thank you.
And other events. Well,